Hello, every folks, and good morning. So today I wanted to make a bit of a theory thing here, because I was curious of all the many characters that have access to like a sort of body snatch kind of mechanic. Who's actually the most threatening in the entire Ogre Battle series? Because I was thinking about it a ton, and I think the conclusions might be a little bit surprising here, so let's get to it. So, way back in March of the Black Queen, we basically see that he's mentioning, as long as there's people like Rashidi around, that darkness is always going to remain here. This, basically, it got rephrased a few times, but the long and short of it is, as long as somebody's, like, evil enough to keep coming back over and over, this crap's just going to keep on happening. So, looking over the series, who actually has the ability to keep on coming back and causing problems? Who has the ability to hop into the bodies of other people and kind of keep perpetuating stuff? Well, the first and most obvious one that we're going to start with here is Rashidi. How do all of their plans actually stack up? Because, I mean, this guy's basic deal is he's been around since the very first one of these things. He was just like a super wizard at the time. And they basically said, okay, so you're one of 12 dudes, you go fight this big evil thing, and everyone will praise the hell out of you. So that's exactly what he did. And, guy basically showed up with all these powers, ended up saving the world and all that. And then over time, he wanted more power and everything else. Eventually, he found out that he had the ability to, like, body hop, more or less. And so ultimately his plan after losing at the end of March of the Black Queen is that, okay, he's going to come back, he's going to set up this whole convoluted plan to come back as the kid of a demigoddess, more or less, in order to come back with all kinds of godlike power to be even better than he was before. As we all know, with the Bodysnatch mechanic, interestingly enough, all of your mental stats carry over even if you die. So if you get transferred into an item, that item will retain that intelligence. If somebody ends up going fully undead and getting fully restored, they end up essentially coming back with that same same mental score with some of their physical stuff jacked up. But in Rashidi's case, that's, I mean, basically exactly what happens. And at the end of Ogre Battle 64, he ends up coming back as a friggin' god baby. Now, I will say his plan basically falls apart right here, because godlike powers or no, he can't even change his own diaper. I mean, babies, whether or not they're magical babies or not, they still need some help. He doesn't have the physical wherewithal to really do very much. I mean, he can probably go and throw around meteors, but he's gonna need somebody to come help him out. And realistically, considering that he's just lying at, well, the middle of a battlefield nobody wants to go to at the time, I'm pretty sure nobody's going to be terribly happy about that, especially once they find, a sudden magic baby over here at the same spot where a bunch of crap went down. I'm pretty sure somebody's going to immediately stab that. So I would say, overall, not a very solid plan. Allegedly, he comes back as another baby for... actually, no, it's not him. It's Albedo that comes back. Okay, ignore that. As far as we know, he is just magical baby that is just levitating in a field the last time that we see him. I think that's a dumb plan, but alright, whatever. Supposedly he comes back with godlike powers to make, Ogre Battle 8 happen. So let's look at the others that were around. So next we got Prince Gares. Now technically, I don't know if this one counts as much. He is technically body hopping, but he's also body hopping with himself. He functionally has made himself immortal by turning himself into a clone army. And yeah, this guy's plan is doomed from the very start, because as we see throughout the game, he is falling right the hell apart. I mean, he basically goes from looking like this intimidating night guide, looking like he's got a Flava Flav clock on him, and looking like he got hit by a bus. He's not exactly the scariest unit in the game, though overall his army is pretty strong, though he didn't exactly pick up on the whole idea that, maybe AoE attacks might be a little bit better than running at everything with your axe. So overall, I'd say it's honestly probably more impressive that he was able to clone the material that they're all running around in. I mean, I'm sure that's a lot of equipment that is very expensive, and they could probably use that to fund a way better army. But you know what? It's a plan. He tried. He basically ran himself ragged in the process. Overall, kind of a D-tier kind of plan, if we're completely honest, but still a cool character. Kind of sort of immortal, though realistically, as soon as somebody finds the original one, he's very easy to kill off, so that plan could definitely have gone better. Alright, next one who has access to a sort of immortality mechanic is Denim from T.O. Lucht. Now, yes, he's technically a good dude, and by the way, ignore that the picture is a little bit off. It's just how this format's working right now. Anyway, so yeah, he's a good guy, but yes, he does have access to various versions of immortality and body snatch mechanics. In the original one, he has full access to necromancy, retissue, and all of that. Now the thing is, retissue and necromancy, that is basically that is some of the scariest crap in the entire series. Because somebody can essentially be killed, brought back as a zombie, and retissued over and over and over, and due to a programming exploit, they can functionally break time. Now, in the remake, interestingly enough, he canonically was given the ability, well, actually semi-canonically, was given the ability to break time. Unfortunately, Coda 3 and 4 were confirmed non-canon, so it's questionable how much time breaking he actually gets. But either way, he's some kind of weird time wizard, but we know that it's sort of like a weird bubble. Like, apparently as soon as the coronation happens, he just forgets how time works or something. Either way, as far as his available stuff, he can turn his soldiers into super weapons, the strongest weapons in the game, potentially, which, interestingly enough, have a property that they will instantly destroy any props on the field, so if you ever wanted to be able to punch down a tree, there you go. But yeah, aside from that, considering that the original version of the kind of invincible super zombie mechanic was basically written out of existence as the class leveling system, and then further completely written out of existence in Reborn, well, actually I'm curious what they're going to do for Reborn. Anyway, point being, we can basically write off all of that stuff and say he basically can make a, a decent-sized squad with super weapons. They're going to be functionally unkillable, and yeah, there's realistically no reason that he should get captured in the Ogre Battle 8 notes, but whatever. So yeah, guy's got a pretty strong squad, seems to be good at leading things, but overall I would say not exactly a massive threat to the existence of anything, especially considering even in his darkest timelines, he's still a pretty good dude. So, moving on. Next up, we got Albedo. Now this guy's got a plan. It's kind of a mix of Rashidi and Gares' plans. Basically, his idea is, he knows that he can just instantly come back to life, so he's already got his backup plan sorted. But he is going to go and come back with an army of dragons, which, okay, you know what? That works. I mean, he probably could have just gone to any mountain range in anywhere in Zenobia and just gone back and forth and gotten himself as many dragons as he needed, but you know what? He decided to go be a dictator over a small island instead. Anyway, so he ends up getting stopped, but yeah, every time he dies, he just comes back to life. He doesn't seem to be particularly focused on his goal, though. In this case, he ends up getting killed off multiple times. He ends up getting killed off before March of the Black Queen, comes back for March of the Black Queen, gets killed off again. Then he comes back, just sort of respawns in Palace of the Dead in Tactics Ogre Lucked. And then, now, this is non-canon, whatever else. But it seems okay, it's not officially canon yet. What we know from what we've heard about Ogre Battle 8, if it ever happens, he's supposed to be the guy that comes back and kills off Tristan as a second magic baby. I don't know what's the deal with the magic babies. Anyway, in his case, though, I believe what actually happens is he spawns in Palace of the Dead, gets instantly killed because that was a dumb plan, and then that's when he actually ends up getting kicked off to Ogre Battle 8. Now, technically, he can theoretically survive that encounter and just ends up being one of Denim's units, and then presumably, like, falls off a volcano or something. I don't know. Either way, he's not very focused on his plan. He doesn't seem very dedicated to making it happen. He's just sort of trying stuff and seeing if it works. So, I would say while his plan is not very solid, definitely one of the more, I guess more likable bad guys there, just because they just sort of keep coming back and trying something dumb. If it works out, it works out, whatever. They're pretty chill about it. They're kind of the stoner of the Rashidi crew, I feel. But anyway, moving on. Next up, this is not really one dude in particular, but the Dragon Mages. These are basically like a background faction that are never really fully expanded on. But basically, they're the ones that come up with all the draconic stuff that the characters through the series end up using. And by the way, I should point out, I'm not really counting... So, I guess we're going to count the Liches as part of their thing. Like, they were basically studying life and death and, you know, transformation of souls and all this other stuff. So liches are basically an attempt for creating an item that that'll basically make somebody an immortal super wizard. So liches kind of get lumped into this. That's what the Ring of the Dead is. They were a little bit unclear on how it works, because originally it was very reliable. It was just an item that was given to somebody. They died with enough intelligence, and, you know, they willed themselves back into existence. As the series went on, it got weirder and weirder. Like in Ogre Battle 64, you had to have their entire lineup of different items. If you didn't have them, you're not getting one. In T.O. Luck Remake, you had to be on one particular floor and just kind of put the ring on, which is kind of interesting, because then it also explains why earlier in the game there's a character that tries to use the Ring of the Dead when they die, and they just die instead. It's funny because I believe in the original one they didn't have the stats for it, and then in the remake they were just in the wrong spot to use it. But anyway, so the Dragon Mages basically, I don't feel like they're a super threatening faction, because they're more or less like the XCOM research department. They're just making all this stuff. They're not really using it. As far as we can tell, they never really make any big plays towards anything. They're just sort of like, hey, here's all this cool stuff we made. Anybody want to check out our, you know, new immortality mechanic? You know, this one only makes you slightly go insane. So they're just a bunch of mad scientists just kind of doing science for the sake of science with some magical stuff thrown in. Occasionally they do make, you know, some slightly world-ending spells, but they're never really the ones to intentionally use them. Usually somebody goes and gets their stuff and uses it for different purposes. And, you know, that's why they usually end up being locked up in weird locations. Anyway, they're all dead at the time the series goes, so we know for a fact they weren't too much of a threat. Alright, next we have possibly the least threatening of the Bodysnatchers. Mr. Alphonse Tartaros here. So, yeah, he gets the Snapdragon. He gets the basic version of the Snapdragon. Actually, by the way, I did lump both versions of the Snapdragon together for Denim. In Alphonse's case, I mean, he only gets access to the sword version. He only can use it up to 4 times, so he can't even really field a full squad. And we know canonically he just sort of leaves it behind, so... Okay, it's interesting on the canon, because it's confirmed that in order to get the A route, or the A+ ending, he has to have personally gotten a hell of a lot of kills, which means that he would have likely gotten at least 1 Snapdragon, because you have to get, when you're fighting the twins the first time, one of the giants will drop the first, well, technically like the 3rd Snapdragon you can get a hold of. But anyway, so canonically it's more or less confirmed that he probably got at least 1. And yeah, he ends up keeping the Ambition as his only reminder of that whole adventure. Presumably he ends up giving the Longicolnus to the Pope. So again, presumably he just keeps his one and only thing out of that whole experience, and hands over all his other stuff to the Church. So technically we could argue that the Lotus Church is the biggest body snatch terror. But anyway, we can sort of also lump this together as Lotus as a whole, because Alphonse by himself, he doesn't care. He's kind of over it by the end of Night of Lotus. He's just sort of doing his job. Lotus as a whole, however, is surprisingly not as much of a threat as the last thing on this list, because they have access to all these weird body snatch and transformation mechanics. I mean, Ogre Battle 64 is entirely about them finding out that they can just sort of hand out a bunch of body transformations to random people and just see how the chaos works. In Lotus's case, though, that even though they have access to all this stuff, it seems mostly like they're hoarding it, expecting the second Ogre Battle to happen, which, you know, we know from the Ogre 8 notes that it sounds like Lotus would be the main faction that's fighting them, so that kind of makes sense, in a way that it's kind of that whole there's always a bigger fish type thing that the series loves to do. Anyway, though, so I feel like, yeah, as a whole, they're not really as massive of a threat as the series likes to make it out to be. They sort of show up, they tend to pretty ineptly handle stuff. In his case, he tends to actually take the most diplomatic approach of the series, but still ends up getting labeled as a bad guy due to some of the worst luck anybody's ever had, ever. Any darn ways, by himself, yeah, not exactly a very threatening body snatcher, but you know who is? Because there's been one character throughout this whole series that's always been there. They've always sort of just been doing stuff. They show up every time. They seem to always pretend to be friendly. Yet, however, we go back to this first thing. I was like, well, as long as there's people willing to do evil stuff, you know, there's always the chance for that whole second Ogre Battle thing. And who's always there, encouraging you to do all the worst stuff in the series? So, okay, we get to Denim, who I think is the biggest threat of the whole series as it stands, right? So think about it from the very beginning. First time you encounter her, what is she doing? She's decapitating random villagers and turning them into pumpkin heads for fun, alright? If you spare her, like, if you die, she just immediately comes back to life somewhere else. If you spare her, if you're completely evil enough, she joins you, alright? So we already know she wants to be on the bad side there, even though she's pretending to be friendly and flirty the entire time. However, if, you know, if you are even slightly decent, namely I believe you have to be above 40% reputation, she will simply give you a glass pumpkin. It lets you turn one, allows you to basically have one of your witches do the same thing that she was doing, namely turning random people into pumpkin heads. So she's more or less coercing you to, like, be her sugar daddy with the whole, like, you have to pay 50 grand to even recruit her thing. And then even then, she might just simply, you know, have you do her job instead of actually joining you. So, okay, kind of a weird start, but where else do we run into them? Well, in Knight of Lotus, technically they're a hidden character, but they're running a shop handing out super weapons. Okay, alright, so they're encouraging a bunch of death to happen. Interesting. Where else do we run into them? Well, in Ogre Battle 64, they're part of the tutorial. They're encouraging new officers to go out into the world and start some wars. Okay, alright, that's a thing, I suppose. And what are they doing in their most canonical version, in Tactics Ogre Lucked? Well, they've opened up a shop once the war has kicked off, once they see that there's a clear winner. And suddenly they're there, once again, selling super weapons and forbidden spells to people, just sort of hanging around. She even puts out an advertisement, right? She even ends up having a traveling shop that goes town to town, selling people these things so that they're accessible to everyone. She's going around ensuring that people have all of these super weapons on hand, and she's getting herself filthy rich in the process. And then if you end up recruiting her, well, you know, then she ends up basically hanging out with the king. Once again, she's put herself in a position where she's hanging out with a major faction leader. She's making sure that all of these crazy weapons are around all over the place. And yeah, every time that she dies, she just immediately comes back and does it again. She is essentially, in my opinion, like, the way that they could easily end the series. Rashidi's dead, Albedo's dead, like, they've just put them petrified in a box in, like, a steel cube in the bottom of the ocean or something. But everything keeps happening, because there's just Deneb in the background that nobody's dealt with, because she's running around seducing everyone. I mean, hell, she even tries on Canopus at one point, and he basically comments on the fact that nobody ever seems to get close enough to her to tell, but she probably would end up feeling like a leather bag if anybody got close enough. She's old as hell. She's presumably been, like, immortal this whole time. We don't know what she's been up to this whole time, but again, everywhere she goes, war seems to follow. So I'm just saying, Deneb might well be the biggest threat of the series to everyone's existence. Let me know what you think. Alright, take care, guys.